Okay, this section is all about the limits that are placed on populations and communities in an ecosystem. So why don't, for example, gophers take over everything, or foxes, or rabbits, or mice? There are reasons why certain species, or all species, populations don't just explode. In order to understand the limits on them, first though we need to understand why they grow or what their capacity for growth is. So that's where we start here with this term biotic potential. And make sure you write down this definition. It's the maximum number of offspring that a species could produce with unlimited resources. So if there were no predators, you had all the food in the world, you had all the space in the world, like anything you could ever want or need or imagine, what's the maximum number of offspring that you could have and that would survive? That's biotic potential. And biotic potential is made up of 4 different parts. There's birth potential, capacity for survival, breeding frequency, and the length of reproductive life. Now we're going to look at each of these ones individually and define them for you. So in your notes, make sure that you write down these definitions as well as at least one of the examples to help you remember what they mean. So the first one is birth potential. That's just the maximum number of offspring per birth event. So just if this organism has offspring, how many do they typically have? So for dogs, for example, on average, this varies between species, but on average they have between 5 and 6 puppies per litter, right? Humans would only be 1 typically. Now we know that there are cases where there are twins or triplets or things like that, but they're a very small percentage of the number of births that we have. So puppies 5 or 6, humans it would be about 1. If you're thinking about something like salmon though, it's somewhere in the range of 2,000 to 10,000 eggs that are laid for every breeding event that happens for a spawning. So you can see there's a wide variety of how many offspring can be produced in a single event. So that's their birth potential. The second one is their capacity for survival. So the number of offspring that reach reproductive age. So even though you may have that many, your birth potential says you have this many offspring, that doesn't mean they're all going to survive to be able to reproduce themselves. So for example, a sea turtle lays 110 eggs on average, but only about 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000 is what they estimate actually survive to reach reproductive age. So a very, very small percentage of those eggs will actually grow to become adults and be able to reproduce themselves. If you look at giraffes, however, in the wild, it's actually estimated to be around 50% or even greater than 50% of those giraffes will be able to reach adulthood and reproduce themselves. Their capacity for survival is much, much higher. Breeding frequency is how often they breed, how often they're going to go through this whole cycle. So, for example, if you're thinking about an elk, they really only reproduce once a year. In the fall, they go through rut. The elk has its big antlers, it chases off the other males, and that's when they breed with the females. Calves will be born in the spring, and they really only do that once a year. But if you look at something like a mouse, they'll have potentially 5 to 10 litters per year. So their breeding frequency is much, much higher. Humans would be, on average, I would say once a year is possible. It can be a little bit shorter than that, but not usually. And obviously with choice, it can be much, much longer. But the possibility is there's no way a human could reproduce any faster than every 9 months. And even then, most females, if their body's just getting back to normal, and especially if they're breastfeeding, the hormone changes tend to lengthen that out to a year or more, depending on a few other factors. But we're probably more in the realm of like an elk, like once a year or even a little bit longer, where mice are their breeding frequency is much, much faster. Now, the length of reproductive life means once you reach your reproductive age, your ability, you're sexually mature, how long can you reproduce for? If we're talking about elephants, for example, they reach maturity at about 15 years, and they can reproduce from the age of 15 all the way to the age of 90. So they have a very long reproductive life. Now, if we put these all together, though, think about their birth potential. They really only have one calf, and I think it's even, for some species, a year or maybe even 2 years. That would be like their gestation period, or at least their breeding frequency would be. But their capacity for survival would probably be very high because they tend to live in groups and protect their young that way. So the amount of growth a population can undergo is a combination of all four of these. How many offspring do they have? How many of them are going to survive? How often are they going to be able to breed? And then how long can they reproduce for? If you're talking about a mosquito, the length of their reproductive life is very, very short. Right? I think an average mosquito lives for about 2 weeks. They breed and then they pretty well die. So they don't have a very long reproductive life. But their numbers stay quite high because they lay a lot of eggs. And even though their survival rate of those eggs may not be extremely high, there's so many of them that they just keep coming around. Dang it. If you're talking about humans, most humans hit puberty probably in their early teens. And most females can reproduce up until they're in their usually about mid-50s is average. So 50 to 55 kind of a range would be their length of their reproductive life would be that range. For human males, it's a little bit different. We go from our early teens when we hit puberty, basically until we die, we're actually capable of reproducing. Now, there's a lot of other health and other factors that go along with that, but that's just one difference between the genders in humans. So those are the 4 things that you need to know that contribute to how fast a population can grow. In the next video, we're going to look at some of the things that keep a population from growing up to their biotic potential.